This podcast is brought to you with limited interruption by Rudy Luther Toyota. Whether looking for an exciting brand new Toyota, a certified pre-owned vehicle, or getting quality routine maintenance and service for your vehicle, Rudy Luther Toyota is the place to go. Rudy Luther Toyota, the southeast corner of 394 and 169 in Golden Valley. Subscribe to the podcast Beyond Politics. They host some of the biggest names and smartest minds. Beyond Politics is from a former Democratic congressman who helped ignite Barack Obama's campaign and a former campaign manager and political columnist. They go beyond the usual chatter on politics, news, science, and books. It's politics and everything beyond. On Beyond Politics, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Broadcasting live on AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota, and in the evenings on WCPT 820 Chicago's Progressive Talk. It is the Matt McNeil Show for your Monday. Welcome to July. 952-946-6205, 952-946-6205 is the phone number. It's good to have you with us today. A busy weekend. I got to be honest, we were going to have a completely different show for you today. Now, to a point, with the SCOTUS rulings, hindsight being 2020 sort of thing, I kind of get a feeling that, it's not the worst thing in the world that this, what we had planned did not work out, because I got a lot of things to talk about. But and I think the guys in Chicago during the holiday interviews, you heard me. One of the holiday interviews was Paul Niland. He is the founder of a thing called Lifeline Ukraine. He's in Kiev, in Ukraine, and we have talked to him a few times for extended periods to get an idea of what life is like in Ukraine, just kind of the opinion of how things are going over there in regards to the war. I mean, once again, 100% on the Ukrainian side here. What the Russians are doing is horrible. And the Ukrainians are so badass. The fact that they have held back this Russian military, and to the point where Russia is running out of troops now. Now they're having to they're trying to bribe people into becoming troops, or they're going to have to get a draft. And if they do a draft, that's going to basically be the end of this, because I think Russia will implode. I think the idea of Russians getting drafted and being sent down there with no equipment is so so infuriating to most of the Russians, even, that it's somewhat terrifying. But we're going to have him back on, because I wanted to talk about how things have gone since the American aid got there, the new weapons, the new rockets and stuff like that. And he informed me this morning. So they've had to instigate rolling blackouts because the Russians have attacked the electric grid, and so they have limited amount of electricity. They have rolling blackouts. Well, we were scheduled to interview him today at 10 o'clock Central Time, which is 6 p.m. Ukraine time, and he informed me that at 6 p.m. Ukraine time, there was scheduled a blackout. And so we tried to do the interview. We got about 7 minutes into it, and then he was gone. So we're going to play that 7 minutes, and we're actually going to try to get him back on the air tomorrow to finish talking about these issues tomorrow on the show, give him some more time, and obviously it is a fascinating It is a fascinating to be able to talk with anyone on the ground there. So that is our hope, is tomorrow we'll have that on. I will say, Patrick, I did get a message from him. The power was out for 4 hours. So they didn't even get power back on in Ukraine until 2 o'clock this afternoon our time, which is 10 p.m. their time. So imagine what the United States would be like if any region of the United States lost power from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. in any given night.
That sounds very difficult, especially if it's a regular every night at dinner time, well into the evening after dark. There's nothing.
Yeah, it is interesting. We're going to play. That's coming up here in a little bit. We're going to play a little bit of what is, what we did talk about there, because we talked a little bit about the day-to-day life of the Ukrainians and how that is. And that's coming up the last segment this hour. We'll play that the last segment this hour. So parts of this show may be pre-recorded. I want to talk, though, and start with what is, Dred Scott was a horrible decision. Dred Scott was, the Citizens United was bad. Dred Scott was such a horrible decision, basically saying that no black person in the United States is ever free. And, it just thinking that somehow that you can't stop slavery to coming into the free states. That was such a bad ruling. This ruling that came down today is on par with as bad as that ruling is. I'm not saying it's worse than that ruling, because the core juxtaposition of that ruling, the Dred Scott ruling, was about human beings and a substantial portion of the population of the United States being subservient to other people, and that even free blacks in America had no rights, period. That was a pretty disturbing ruling. This one, it's not worse, but the idea of what you have unleashed by basically saying, as long as a president thinks what he's doing while in office is constitutional, then you can't hold him accountable for his actions, is amazing. I want to start, though, by talking about Doug Burgum. Now, this is the North Dakota governor who is basically strapped on his knee pads and is basically trying to become the vice presidential pick. And he was on one of the weekend shows this weekend, and he claimed that we are living under a Biden dictatorship, which is laughable. Which is, you look at these Supreme Court rulings that are coming down, it is laughable to accuse this country of being under a dictatorship of Joe Biden. We are under a dictatorship, but it's a conservative dictatorship. And in case you haven't missed it, that is exactly what is going on today in this world. It is. The conservatives have basically overthrown the country. Take a look at what happened after the Biden debate performance. Even though Donald Trump's was on many levels far more disturbing, Donald Trump did no wrong, but Joe Biden was horrible. That is the narrative, and take a look at the Supreme Court rulings. Democrats they are never right. Republicans are never wrong. We have a dictatorship today. It doesn't have a face, although we could put Trump's face on it. But he currently is not the president. I guarantee you it will be a Trump dictatorship if he does win this election. But we already have a dictatorship without the figurehead. We have a world where the media and the courts, and to a point the Congress, is already usurped by this ideology that one side is never wrong, the other side is never right. And that the standard has permeated. Take a look. It's permeated into the media. Like I said, look at how the news media reports on Democrats and Republicans. Republicans are corrupt as hell. Republicans are, frankly, it's disturbing how many right-wing Republicans are found violating children and women in the last month. And you probably haven't heard any of that. You know why? Because the news media doesn't report that because, well, there are a lot of conservatives don't want to hear about that. But every Democrat, if a hair is out of place on their head, it's, oh, how dare you disrespect this country. I think a great example of this was the quote-unquote latte salute of Barack Obama, and how could you disrespect the troops like that? But the same people that were furious at Barack Obama about that had no problem with Donald Trump calling World War I veterans losers. No problem with that at all. Nope, no problem with that at all. This is... Here we go. Let me just read through this. Former President Donald Trump is immune from prosecution for official actions but can face trial for private conduct, a divided Supreme Court ruled on Monday, declaring a broad new definition of White House power that may stand for generations and will further delay the Trump's election interference case in D.C. The 6-3 decision along ideological lines appears to rule out one set of allegations in Trump's D.C. case involving his conversations with Justice Department officials after Joe Biden's 2020 election victory, and signals other parts of the case against him may proceed only after additional lower court rulings. It seems highly unlikely the 45th president will go on trial on charges of trying to subvert the 2020 election before voters cast ballots in this year's presidential contest in which Trump is the presumptive Republican nominee. When and if the trial does proceed, it may be with significant whittled-down set of evidence. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts said, a president may not be prosecuted from exercising his core constitutional powers if he's elected at a minimum to a presumptive immunity from prosecution for all his official acts. But Roberts added the president enjoys no immunity from unofficial acts, and not everything the president does is official. The president is not above the law. But you've muddied the waters so badly that a president, what you have basically said is this. If a president honestly thinks what they're doing is constitutional, it's virtually impossible to hold them accountable. And it gets worse, by the way. Sonia Sotomayor, today's decision to grant former president criminal immunity reshapes the institution of the presidency. It makes a mockery of the principal foundation of our Constitution and the system of government that no man is above the law. Let the president violate the law and let him exploit the trappings of his office for personal gain. Let him use his official power for evil ends, because if he knew that he may one day face liability for breaking law, he might not be as bold and fearless as we'd like him to be. That's the majority's message today. Absolutely. Even if these nightmare scenarios never play out, and I pray they never do, the damage has been done. The relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of the official power, the president is now king above law. Roberts' majority opinion was joined by all three justices nominated by Trump, in Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito Jr. The court's three liberal justices forcefully dissented, with Sotomayor saying the conservative majority gives the president Trump all the immunities he asked for and more. It was noticeable contrast from the high-profile cases involving U.S. presidents in which the high court has found consensus. The majority reshapes the institution of the presidency and makes a mockery of the principle that no man is above the law. And that was Sotomayor, joined by Kagan and Brown-Jackson. With fear of our democracy, I dissent. Justice Amy Coney Barrett largely agreed with the majority's definition of the presidential immunity, but disagreed with their decision to bar prosecutors from presenting immunized official acts as trial evidence. The Constitution does not. So basically, you can't even provide evidence. Okay, so their prosecutors are preventing from presenting immunized official acts as trial evidence. So basically, if someone says, I was doing this, the evidence, you could have someone saying, here's a video picture of them murdering somebody. You can't introduce that as evidence. It's insanity. The Constitution does not require blinding juries to the circumstances around the conduct of which presidents can be held liable. Roberts said such evidence should not be allowed in trial because it would permit a prosecutor to indirectly, what he cannot do directly, invite the jury to examine acts for which president is immune from prosecution, is nonetheless prove his liability on any charge. So once again, they can't even bring in evidence the president did anything wrong. This is a king. We have just had the Supreme Court justice to give Trump immunity have redefined the presidency as a monarchy. On 4th of July week, too. It's the Matt McNeil Show. It's the Matt McNeil Show. Thanks for being with us today. 952-946-6205. I love Cataboo up on social media. She says, I'm a small government conservative. That's why I think the president should be allowed to commit unlimited crime. On point. Digging deeper in the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Roberts' majority ruling that handed down Trump get-out-of-jail-free cards. MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Rubin claimed the devil was in the details, and the ruling it's even worse than it was initially reported. Speaking with MSNBC host Katie Tur, Rubin held up a copy of the ruling and bluntly said, I want to put my voice in with Andrew Rosenberg's choir here when he said, much more a disaster than might seem to be based on the rules that are being carved out here. It is a big deal. On page 18, she added, there's a paragraph in terms of guidelines for a judge to determine what's official and what's unofficial. They said that the majority, in dividing official from unofficial conduct, courts may not inquire into the president's motives. This is a huge issue in oral argument. Chief Justice Roberts asking John Sauer, what about bribery? Let's say a former President Trump or a president appointing somebody to an ambassadorship gets a whole bunch of money for that. Are you saying we can't consider the bribery, but we can consider the acceptance of the money? That's nonsensical. Despite what they're carving out the rule that the motive that can't be considered, if you appoint somebody, it doesn't matter whether you're doing that for your own private gain. So basically, what they said is, you can hold a president accountable. You can't use any evidence against that president, nor can you factor in motive. But if you can somehow, without evidence and motive, find that he was guilty, well, we're going to stand by that. If you haven't watched Law and Order, those are the two things that you need to prove a crime: motive and evidence. And if you don't have motive and evidence, you don't have a crime. They basically just said the president is without any kind of official overview. And we need to understand and accept. When I go back to what I said at the beginning, that this is a conservative dictatorship that we are currently living under in this country. That basically Republican, because they have done this for Trump. And I'm going to get to this here in a sec. I want to put this together with this whole notion that you couldn't prosecute the January 6th rioters for trying to destroy the Electoral College ballots, because even though they are saying we want to destroy the Electoral College ballots, which they did on camera, that you can't charge them with intent unless they actually destroyed the ballots, which makes no damn sense. You shouldn't have to have a dead body to see, well, now we see their intent. They can sit there as they storm the Capitol, as they're on the Senate floor and the House floor saying, where are the Electoral College ballots? We want to destroy them. That should be enough. And they ruled that way. Now, I want to make sure we step back for a second and understand why I brought that up with the idea of a conservative dictatorship. If this court case that they ruled on today involved Biden or Obama or Clinton, it would have very quickly been a 9-0 ruling against the president, saying, no president is above the law. No president is above the law. If that ruling from last Friday involved Black Lives Matter protesters versus January 6th protesters, without a doubt in my mind, the same exact ruling would have been overturned. Probably 9-0, saying no, that intent has to be factored in. If they're saying they're going to destroy something, you have to do that. This is what I'm talking about. We've gotten a place now where these rulings are specifically for Republicans. And it will be a hoot, an absolute hoot, to see the same Supreme Court undo this when it comes to a Biden or a future Democratic president's crime. That they will basically say, well, I mean, we're not talking about him. His name's not Trump. We passed this Supreme Court ruling solely because of Donald Trump. I've seen plenty of conservatives argue as, well, no, Joe Biden can be held accountable. Can't be held accountable. Well, they've already, today of all days, the House is suing him for the notes, the Justice Department for the notes on this, even though the president has claimed executive privilege. I guarantee you that same Supreme Court is saying, well, wait a second here. You can factor in motive and intent and evidence with that case, but not with a Trump case. This is God, it could be the worst ruling in the history of this country, because you have undone, President Adams only dreamed of returning this country to a monarchy like this. Do you understand what Donald Trump could do now if he gets in the White House? He could back up dump trucks to a National Federal Reserve Bank and say, fill her up with $1,000 bills, please. And just take the money. and say, I thought my constitutional right was there. And you can't factor motive or evidence in against him. How about we even get darker? How about that? Donald Trump, if he wins election again, could order the military to round up all the firstborn daughters of this country and line them up in the White House. And he basically could go down and pick each one, take them to the Rose Garden, and rape them in the Rose Garden. He could do that because you can't factor in motive and you can't factor in evidence. And all he has to do is saying, I thought the Constitution allowed me to be able to do whatever I wanted. And in that scenario, I want to make sure you understand how much of a Republican conservative dictatorship we are currently living under. 95% of the Republicans in the House and the Senate would sit there and argue, yep, the president has a right to rape your daughter. The Supreme Court would come on back and say, well, we don't agree with raping the firstborn daughters of everybody in the country. The president thought it was under Constitution, so it's okay for him to do. That's how crazy this ruling is. Because you can't basically prosecute him on motive or evidence. This is the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. Now, this could just be stalling the case that if Trump wins, he can then pardon himself. This case goes away. That's the argument they're going to try to make. And that's easily defendable under their whole thing. Well, the Constitution says I can pardon people. I'm going to pardon myself. But then if he loses, this is just, at the very least, maybe their whole goal is just, you know what, we're not going to open this can of worms. We'll eventually come back and say, no, you have to hold him accountable for this stuff. But at least we've delayed it. But at the same time, let's go with the child rape thing. If he did that, the Supreme Court is saying, well, you first have to go to court. You have to prove it. It's got to go to appellate court. It's got to go to us. We're sure as heck not going to rule quickly on that. We're going to take 6 months, and then we'll determine whether it's going to be whether or not that's against the law or anything. It's a sham court. It's a sham country at this point. It is a Republican dictatorship. Yikes. It is the Matt McNeil Show.
Talk to me for a little while.
Broadcasting in the evenings on WCPT 820 Chicago's Progressive Talk and in the afternoons on AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota. It's the Matt McNeil Show on your Monday. Good to have you with us. So we are just a little bit of a background here. Well, a short week for us. We're here today, tomorrow, and then we're off for the Independence Day holiday week. And I hope you have a wonderful time there. We'll have some best ofs that running through the end of the week. 952-946-6205, 952-946-6205. Julie is in Minneapolis. Wanted to chime in this afternoon. Hi, Julie.
Hi. No, before I get to my question and your opinion about something, it just popped up on my phone, and I'm serious. I started to tear up. It has the sound and the visuals of Dwight David Eisenhower, his speech to the troops before they stormed Normandy, about freedom for the world, and I'm just going to start crying. It really moved me. But the reason I called is that it's not true that we Americans are just divided down the middle and we're at each other's throats and we can't agree on anything. That's not true. Over 90% of Americans are dissatisfied and disgusted with the Supreme Court, and that's before the crazy rulings of the last couple of days.
And Julie, Julie, if I can step on in here, I think you're absolutely right. And she is right. We are being told we're divided by people that want division because division basically allows them to do this. And they have done this for so damn long. Once again, we are sitting right now in a conservative dictatorship. And if Trump takes the White House, he can say my constitutional powers tell me I can't ever leave the office. That Supreme Court has basically said, yeah, no, you can lose an election and stay in the White House and you don't have to leave. I mean, it is, someone posted this, and you're talking about D-Day, Julie. On March 1933, the Enabling Act became law in Germany, giving the chief executive power to enforce his own laws without checks and balances. The passing of the act marked the formal transition from democratic republic to totalitarian dictatorship. 6 months later, it was a one-party state as the Nazis took over Germany. That is what you have got here. And I'm going to get to the end of these rulings here. I'm going to talk about them, and I'm going to give you a little bit of advice about what the only way we can stave this off at this point. The only way. Supreme Court on Monday ordered lower courts to take another look at a pair of laws from Florida and Texas that imposed restrictions on how social media companies can moderate potential content posted on their platforms, keeping the laws blocked during additional proceedings. Elena Kagan, this was a 9-0 ruling. Basically, they said they didn't do the process right, if I understand the way this goes. It's a bit of a win for the states of Texas and Florida, but not really, because they're saying dot I's and cross T's. They tossed out lower court rulings and sent the two cases back for the proceedings, but the cases are still, the laws are still on hold until this whole thing gets through. The court said neither lower court conducted the proper analysis of First Amendment challenges to the laws regulating major social media platforms. There's no noted dissents, although some justices concurred in part. The question is, in such a case, is whether a law's unconstitutional applications are substantial compared to its constitutional ones. To make that judgment, a court must determine in the law's full set of applications, evaluate which are constitutional, which are not, and compare the one to the other. Neither court performed that necessary inquiry. Kagan explained that the higher court vacated both decisions for reasons separate from the First Amendment merits because neither of the appeals courts properly considered the nature of the challenge, noting that the parties primarily focused on the effects the laws could have on traditional social media feeds. Kagan said on the arguments revealed that laws might apply to and differently affect other kinds of websites and apps. During oral arguments in February, the justices questioned whether laws could apply to other platforms like Uber and Etsy. It's an interesting thought process. Considering, I mean, once again, you got to understand, these two laws that Texas and Florida wrote are just vague. And I don't necessarily think that they're ruling against the social media companies. But I think what they're saying is that if you want to do this, you need to specifically identify what is freedom of speech on a private social media company's website. And if freedom of speech is screaming that, praising the Nazis or talking derogatory about black people or telling people wrong information about COVID, that somehow is protected speech, well, I don't think that that's going to fly. Will have to remain to be seen. I mean, there are some people that are more upset about that case. I think that case is just a jumbled mess at this point, and it's very hard to dictate where that's going to go. The other one, though, this is, and I'll give you a little story at the end of this about what the whole point of conservative mentalities towards regulations are. The Supreme Court opened the door Monday to new broad challenges to regulations long after they take effect. The third blow to a week to federal agencies. The justice ruled 6-3, once again, party lines, in favor of a truck stop in North Dakota that wants to sue over a regulation on debit card swipe fees that the federal appeals court in Washington upheld 10 years ago. Federal law set a 6-year deadline for broad challenges on regulations. In this case, the regulations from the Federal Reserve governing the fees merchants must pay banks whether customers use a debit card took effect in 2011. The deadline for the lawsuits over the regulation was 2017. The Corner Post, a truck stop in Watford City in West North Dakota, didn't open its doors until 2018. Still, a federal appeals court dismissed the challenge as too late. The company appealed to the Supreme Court. The Biden administration had urged the court to uphold the dismissal because otherwise governmental agencies would be subject to endless challenges. The decision could take on a new significance in the wake of last week's ruling that overturned the 1984 Chevron decision that made it easier to uphold regulations across a swath of American life. The court also stripped the Securities and Exchange Commission, the major tool for citing securities fraud. Chief Justice Roberts captured the dilemma facing the court when the Corner Post case was argued. Agencies could face repeated challenges 10 years later, 20 years later, and sort of have to create the universe, repeatedly. So, all right. So what is the whole goal here? And to understand this, let me explain regulations for you. Regulations are generally put into place because the government has noticed that companies, particularly companies, corporations, have broken the law repeatedly in very specific ways to where they can write a law that says preemptively you can't do this. All right? That's the whole goal, is to basically, and I'll give you a great example of this, is chemical dumping. So there tons of companies would just find the nearest lot, take out their corrosive chemicals, drop them there, even with their company's names labeled on the barrel, and walk away and say there's no way you can hold us accountable. That was their argument. Now, we have changed laws, and states have you have states that put in laws, and the federal government has put in laws about poisoning water supplies and stuff like that. We've learned some bit. But here's where the divide comes in. When you put a regulation in, you put a law in, that's one thing. A regulation regulates the company before the fact. A law holds someone accountable after the fact, okay? So the regulation is there to say you can't dump your chemicals anywhere you want to. If you do, you're going to be held accountable. What conservative policy on this really stands for is no front-end accountability whatsoever. At least for the time being, they have no problem with back-end accountability. That if you break the law some way, you eventually could be held accountable if you definitively broke the law. So you can't tell a large corporation you can't dump chemicals. What you have to do is have evidence that company dumped the chemicals. Then you can sue them after the fact for doing it. There's the difference. The reason why Republicans and conservatives don't want regulations, they seem to be okay with laws but not regulations, is because they know there are ways around those laws. That instead of putting it into a vacant lot with their barrels with their name on it, they just, in the middle of the night with an armed guard that shoots anybody that sees them, they just dump the barrels, leave the stuff there. All of a sudden, it's someone else's problem. And unless you have evidence that basically says, oh, these were the people that did it, there's not much you can do about that. Generally, vacant lots don't have a lot of security cameras, so... And, when does it even come to light? I mean, this chemical dumping is a great example because it's so vague. You can say, well, we didn't dump something yesterday, even though the company dumped something 3 years ago, which is why you're seeing the readings. So it becomes incredibly hard to hold a company accountable without regulations on the front end. Regulations are what are designed to keep companies honest. Without them, and by the way, and once again, let's go to something I talked about last week. We have chunks of airplanes falling out of airplanes right now because companies don't care about the safety of the people that are flying in the airplane. They care about their bottom dollar and will kill as many damn people on a plane if they have to through shoddy work and shoddy construction as long as they save a buck. That's what they'll do. And they're actually to a point where the federal government's actually thinking of criminal charges at this point for that stuff. So you basically, and the reason why you can file criminal charges out there is because there are regulations that say, hey, you can't just put your corporate profit model ahead of the safety of the American people. And yet, what the Supreme Court has done is, and through these rulings, is basically erode the argument of whether or not we can hold any corporation, whether it's a small gas station in North Dakota, who I'm betting has lawyers from some massive law firm out in Los Angeles or in Texas or something like that. He just happened to be, as a small town, western North Dakota gas station owner, has enough money to get a $20 million an hour lawyer. That would be my guess. That they basically, that no matter what, that you can't regulate them before the fact. Sure, you can hold them accountable if you catch them, but unless you catch them, you can't hold them accountable. Yeah, it's pretty disturbing. There is only one path out of this at this point. There is only one path out of this. Joe Biden's got to be the president of the United States. And I understand, shut up, shut up, shut up. I want you to think of the most heinous, violent, horrible crimes that could be committed by Donald Trump and realize you're nowhere near what that guy will do with this kind of power in the White House. You don't even understand when he goes around to, radio stations that broadcast stuff he doesn't like and orders the troops to, kill us all. And he says, well, I thought that was under the Constitution. Or he basically goes out and premeditatedly arrests all these people. By the way, isn't that the funny part about the whole anti-regulation thing? When it comes to a company, you can't regulate them beforehand, but you can basically racially profile any black man in this country. Yeah, the hypocrisy of the conservatives is out there on its own planet. But the only option, and I want to repeat this, the only option we have to stave off this nightmare is that the Democrats have to win, and they have to win big. My guess would be if Joe Biden wins a second term, this Supreme Court, without even having a case in front of it, will revisit this ruling and say, well, one thing about that ruling we wanted just to clarify is, no, we never meant that a president was unaccountable. That would be my guess. And I'm dead serious. I think the Supreme Court would come on out if Joe Biden wins and very quickly say, let me just clarify what the rules are so before Joe Biden tries to break any laws. But they won't do that if Donald Trump gets in the White House. I don't care what your problem is with Joe Biden. I don't care. Do you want this country to survive? That is literally the ballot this year. Do you want this country to survive? Yes or no? 952-946-6205, 952-946-6205. We'll take a break. When we come back, we're going to play the little bit of interview we had with Paul Niland with Lifeline Ukraine. By the way, Lifeline Ukraine, go find it online. It is, and I'll put a link out to it later, it is a great organization helping with mental health and suicide prevention for Ukrainians worldwide. They need help. Make a donation. Lifeline Ukraine. Paul Niland when we come on back. It's the Matt McNeil Show. An absolute privilege to chat with Paul Niland once again. Lifeline Ukraine. He's the founder of Lifeline Ukraine, a great service in Ukraine offering mental health services, suicide prevention for military soldiers, veterans, their families, and pretty much anyone Ukrainian worldwide at this point. He's kind enough today to join us for this full hour to talk about what is going on in Ukraine and give us an update of things on the ground. Paul, as always, just an absolute privilege to chat with you, my friend.
Hey, Matt, it's great to be back with you again. I'm not sure how many times we've done this now, 4 or 5, but it's always a good conversation. I'm looking forward to getting into it with you.
Well, and I want to start off with something here. We could lose you here because you now are, and I'm not sure if this was something happening before, but now they're trying to do blackouts in certain parts. I imagine throughout Ukraine throughout this process. I imagine as a power saving technique. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we're once again back in the situation where we have rolling blackout. The Russian attacks on the energy infrastructure nationwide, right, across the entire country over the last couple of months have been very, very, very intense. And it underscores the argument that Ukraine has been making for a long time. We need more air defenses, right? And because we haven't had those air defenses, a huge, huge amount of our electricity generating capacity has been destroyed. And so, therefore, we don't have enough power to be able to keep the lights on 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. So we're in the process of attempting to rebuild what can be rebuilt. That's actually the one of the topics of the next article that I'm writing for Byline Times right now. It's tough right now. But it's also the middle of the summer. I mean, it's pleasant to go outside for a walk. This winter is going to be very, very grim. This will be my 22nd winter in Ukraine, and it will be the grimmest, I'm certain.
How often are the blackouts coming? Is it a daily? How often are you seeing it?
So we have a schedule that gets published, and it can tell you when you can expect a blackout. And we should have had one at 9 this morning. The power stayed on until 10:30, though. It just is what it is. And then sometimes the power cuts can last. So you will have at least 2, probably 3 power cuts every day. And they last from 2 hours to up to 5 hours.
We have this has been going on for a few years at this point. So let's talk a little bit about the impact. Obviously, this is a major impact of life and going on. But talk a little bit about the day-to-day life of Ukrainians right now as this war rages on here. How has obviously the threat of bombs, the threat of airstrikes, the brave soldiers still fighting on the fronts. But as the day-to-day life for the average Ukrainian, talk about what has changed for that just in your daily, beyond blackouts and stuff like that.
It's all of those things that you list, but it's all of them on a constant basis as well. And I know that I've said to you when we've chatted before, Matt, that the thing that gets to me personally is the images of destruction that I'm constantly exposed to. In the early days, because many of my colleagues at Lifeline Ukraine are veterans. In the early days, many of them went back into military service, and that was always my fear. That one of my friends is going to be seriously injured or killed in fighting. Just 2 minutes before I jumped on to record this show, I quickly looked at something on Facebook, and the first post there is one of my good friends who on the 24th of February, he was an entertainer before that. He used to be an MC that would, do English language parties, and he was one of the MCs in the stadium for Euro 2012. This is... but on the 24th of February, he said, "Give me a goddamn gun, and I'm going to go and fight." And I just saw that he's now in hospital. He looks well, and he says that he's recovering. He's having some medical treatment. But we've all lived with the constant fear of losing people who are close to us, and it's all of that, and there's a frustration as well, Matt, and it came out in my last answer that, we didn't have to come to the point that our critical civilian infrastructure was destroyed to such a degree. It didn't have to be like this. Had we had better defenses in higher numbers, higher quantities earlier, we'd have saved a lot of this damage and all of this. I'm okay, I'll be 52 this month, but I'm in good shape. I'm not overweight. I keep myself fit, right? I can run up and down the stairs, but it's my older neighbors, some of whom who have mobility issues that I worry about, But in general, there is an air of stoic determination in that this war will be ended, and it will be ended on Ukraine's terms. And everybody here is united behind that singular thought and goal. And how do we get there? And Matt, one of the areas where I'm in the battle is the information space, right? And I think that's where I'm best serving Ukraine in writing the articles that I write in bringing a Ukrainian perspective into published news and a wider audience, and then the nonsense and rubbish that I have to deal with on Twitter as well, which I know that you see and you get a kick out of too.
Well, and it is, there is a spirit here, and that's one of the things I follow a lot of people in Ukraine. And a lot of people that are keeping track of what's going on with the military, a lot of people talking about the daily life. And there is a spirit here which is addictive, and this is one of the... I'm 100% Ukraine. Russia is a bunch of jackasses, and you guys can't beat them fast enough in my mind. We'll talk a little bit about the Americans and their response and getting back. But when you talk about the Russians attacking your infrastructure points, and the civilian targets, isn't this really a sign that Russia is doing so poorly in this war that all they can basically do is target what technically is like softer targets because they can't break through the Ukrainian lines? So they're basically just doing the cowards thing and attacking, random things within Ukraine, hoping it breaks the spirit of the Ukrainian people. And that's that was that's when we lost Paul. That was when the blackout rolled in. We're going to interview him tomorrow again. He's thinking that the blackout's not going to happen tomorrow. We don't know. We're going to hopefully have another half hour with him tomorrow to talk about what's going on in Ukraine. Good stuff there. Vote Democrat. That's the only way out of this. Chicago, have a good night. Minneapolis, St. Paul, hour 2 up next. Hour number 2 of the show here on your Monday. Nice to have you with us. Matt and Patrick here, 952-946-6205. 952-946-6205. I got to get it on out. First of all, talk about Pride this last weekend, because I was out at the booth on Saturday, and that was good fun. We did an hour broadcasting live and was able to walk around Pride. It was good. It was like very well attended. The craziest thing, and I talked about this on that show, is the Twins were handing out like the best loot, and they were handing it out. They're like no bobbleheads, and they had Prince hats, and I mean, it was crazy. And I'm like looking at the line, it's like, what's this line for? Is this the merch line? Oh no, this is the freebie line. You're like, oh, now I get it. That was incredible. But I mean, there were so many different things. I made this comment. I thought this was good. I had so many free stickers on me. I looked like a NASCAR car. That's kind of how it looked. It was great fun. I had a very good time, and I considered myself the pregame show of the real stars of Saturday, which was the Saturday afternoon lineup of LGBTQIA plus friendly shows with JP Debergosian and The Queer Book Saved My Life and The Gailey Show. Twin Cities Pride. Then after that, we had Ellie Krug came in after that, and then Philip Anthony and his show in the 5 o'clock hour. So it was a great time. They had a lot of fun. So that was Saturday. Sunday, we went out for the parade. Now, I don't know how many people were out there. I don't know what the estimate was. I would say well over 10,000. I mean, it was packed down at the end of the line. I can only imagine what it was like on the north side of the line. And I mean, it's because where I was just north of 13th, and so I could see up. And about 10th? Hennepin Avenue takes a left turn, it angles to the left. It goes up out of theaters. So I'm not sure how many people were up there. I couldn't really see it, but we got there. The parade was supposed to start at 11. Now, the parade was great. I mean, we stuck around for a little bit of it because it was late, and I'll get to that here in a second. But it was late, but it was good fun. It was very nice to see a lot of the corporate sponsors come on out. I mean, I will say Target, especially after you toned down your Pride Month collection and basically didn't, said, some stores, we don't want to even put it out there because they're going to get upset about it. Come on, man. I think that's a little cowardly. But needless to say, you were out there. And I think one of the things that I think about is, I was talking to my daughter about this after the parade. I said, if you believe the numbers, and I don't have no reason to doubt it, 10 to 12% of the population is gay or, LGBTQIA plus. I mean, somewhere in that spectrum. By all means, if you're a decent company, you realize 10% of your company is like this. You shouldn't have policies against them, Tractor Supply, you jackasses. That you shouldn't have policies against them. And some of the companies, and Delta had a very impressive crew that came through. I like the Timberwolves. Yeah, the Timberwolves they were doing well. Quite a few. It was quite a few people out there. A lot of people out there to have fun, and that was the crowd. The crowd was there to have fun. It was parents. It was kids, and a lot of kids. Come back to that. But I had a good time. Swung on by the booth. And, I don't know how packed. Did you get out there at all, Patrick? yesterday?
I
this
did.
weekend?
It was. I kind of got there before the parade ended, but as you kind of imagine, that a big crush of people came over, kind of as that wound down. So it was thick with people. It was very crowded.
Yeah. Getting out on any of the entrances towards Hennepin that was rough. There's a lot of people there. What time did it go to last night? Do you know off the top of your head?
I think it closed at 6.
I gotta imagine it was pretty packed all afternoon. A lot of people out there. Anyway, good times. Nice job, Pride. Look forward to it next year, for sure. Now, why was the parade late? It was 12 noon, and we had yet to see anyone come down the parade route. Now, I did not know at this point. I was looking up on social media to see if there was any word about why this was delayed. And what you found out, and at some point I leaned into my wife and I said, there's got to be some sort of protest or something up there that's going on that's delaying this, because even if they were walking pretty slow, after an hour, if they started the parade at 11, after an hour they should be down by us. I mean, that's a meandering. So there had to be something that was going on that was delaying the parade. It didn't change the mentality. I mean, everyone out there, even though they were hot and kind of waiting, it was, the mentality was, okay, we're waiting for the parade. Then came the parade, and I saw it coming, and indeed there was a protest group, and I don't know what their modus operandi was. It seems like they must have blocked the very front of the parade route for 30, 40 minutes, and then decided to go down the parade route and scream. Now, what were they protesting? Now, I know that they're going to. Okay, and protesters. Okay, let me make sure you understand something. You guys, I don't know what your goal was, but you guys just you get so convoluted in your desire to protest that it doesn't make any damn sense what you're protesting. Was it anti-police? Was it Palestine? I seriously don't know. I asked 4 people who were standing on me as you walked by. No one had a clue what your really main goal was. I'm going to think it was Palestine, because there was like 6 Palestinian flags, and I swear, and I couldn't really see the banner where I was standing. I could have sworn I saw something about Palestine on the banner, but I couldn't say that. But outside of that, there was nothing at all talking about Palestine as you marched by us. I mean, there were 2 screaming people that were doing, kind of that sort of thing. And they were screaming so loud, it was getting distorted. Now, I took away some of it. Some of it was anti-police. Some of it was anti-Biden, anti-racial profiling, our streets, native land, which, okay, no charges for drug crime, something like that. I can't remember. I couldn't really hear what you said. Now, once again, that's what I heard the 2 screamers screaming, which if it was about Palestine, I didn't hear anything about Palestine. The visual was even more confusing. There was a flag there, the person, or a sign that this person had was, stop supporting Ukraine. All right. Of course, your standard anti-Mayor Fry, lingo. You had anti-Biden stuff. There was a Puerto Rican flag. I have no idea what the protest about Puerto Rico is. It wasn't clear at all. It was a mess. Now, protesters, let's have a conversation for a quick sec, okay? Because I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think all you guys were fake, but this didn't seem to have any focus whatsoever. This was just a, ah! And let me explain something to you. Nobody was, boy, I hear those 2 screaming people out there, and completely actually confusing message. I'm on their side. No one joined you that day. The people didn't jump out of the parade route and jump in line with you and you marched into victory because no one knew what the hell you were talking about. No one joined you yesterday. Now, part of that is because you are on a parade which is about love and joy and pride and welcoming, and you basically, through your fairly selfish personal motivations, try to make it, and that doesn't fly. Okay? That doesn't fly. Now, you have a right to protest. Giving Pride credit, they let you basically scream to your heart's content. And I think they let you scream to your heart's content because you didn't make any damn sense. Pick a lane. Are you there for Palestine? Fine. Then take all your other pet issues, all your other flags, your two screaming idiots, and get them on the Palestinian message. And once again, I have been very disappointed in where Israel has gone with this. I think that they need to ease up. Israel had a right to respond. Absolutely. I feel as if they had a right to respond heartily, which they did. But now at this point, it seems about either eliminating or moving the Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip so they can develop it for private land. And I'm not exactly cool with that. I think it's bad. You might have been able to win a few people over in the crowd if you went with that. You didn't. Because once again, the two screamers at no point brought up Palestine when they came anywhere near us. So if it was about Palestine, that was lost. Is it anti-police? I got a second thing about this I'll come back to here in a second. Well, once again, things are nuanced. Yes, under the Bob Kroll Police Department, Minneapolis police was horrific. O'Hara, I think, has been doing... Frankly, I think O'Hara has been doing a pretty damn good job considering what he inherited. And I think he is definitely trying to change the culture and the mentality of that police department, and I somewhat support him. Now, if you're still angry about what happened beforehand, I'm not going to get in the way of that because I'm an angry person about that too. All the stuff with George Floyd and Bob Kroll and the Jaleel Stallings and the whole mess and all the cowards of Bob Kroll's police department running away and taking massive severance checks and running away as opposed to actually face consequences for their behavior. Yep, really disturbing. But at no point was there that context of hold these people accountable, go get that money back. I mean, my God, I think both of those issues would very much garner a lot of support in this town. If go after the Bob Kroll police officers, charge them with crimes, take back that money, I'm 100% for that. I'm 100% for that, especially the people that have a laundry list of complaints against them. People that basically went on a hunting expedition of Minneapolis residents. Absolutely. Absolutely. But there was no consistency there. Was it anti-Biden? I don't know. I think most of the people in that crowd were probably pro-Democrat. And most people, after today, I'm sorry. They're stupid and they're stupid. You want to be against Joe Biden at this point, considering what's on the line this election, then go be stupid somewhere else, all right? Because we have to save this country. But fine, yesterday before these rulings were handed down. But there was no consistent message there. When you do something like this, do you remember when the city council member was Jenkins got quote unquote kidnapped or held against her will by a bunch of protesters, and she entertained them. She basically didn't okay, what do you guys want? And these idiots were like, we want a Chipotle order, like you're some kind of bad Batman villain. You guys don't, literally the epitome of the dog that caught the car. You don't know what to do with it once you actually had someone there. And so you were so stupid about it, you wanted to get a Chipotle order. That was your great cause du jour. Nice going, idiots. I get it. The protesting group is full of rage, full of anger. But nobody cared. All they were mad at you because you delayed the parade. No one got swung over to your side. the city and the Pride folks allowed you to vent your frustration at the front of the parade because you have a right to protest, but you didn't succeed at doing any damn thing outside of confusing everybody. And that's stupid. And whereas I have zero doubt there are people within that protest group that were probably, pro-Palestine or anti-police or this. It's these kind of generic mass mumbles of protest which actually I think do involve conservatives who have infiltrated these groups whose whole goal is to be, and they can't even get on message. It's not about actually trying to change anything. It's just about making people angry. And if there was ever the epitome of a protest that seemed to only be there to make people angry, it was that protest at the beginning. It was not about solving any problems. It was not about bringing in awareness. It was about just making people angry. That screams to me AstroTurf. That screams to me Republicans involved and conservatives involved in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not saying that everyone in there was a conservative. I'm not ever saying that. But I'm saying that your group was probably being pushed along like, no. Don't focus on one thing. Just be this angry thing. Try to appeal to everyone's anger. It didn't work. Now, one little side note here. Colbert the other day on his show, when some idiots try to spray paint Stonehenge for climate protest, he said, guys, I agree with you, but what you're doing makes me want to go buy a Hummer. Here you are walking down a parade route with a ton of kids, and the two screamers on the microphone kept swearing pretty offensively the entire way down. Freedom of speech, fine. Freedom of speech, fine. But don't think that you made any friends or anyone respected you because in front of a bunch of 7, 8, and 9-year-olds, you basically started screaming swear words at the top of your lungs, thinking you were making a difference. You were making a mess in your freaking diaper. That's all you guys were doing. What are you doing? I might agree with you on, say, Palestine or holding the Bob Crow Police Department back from those days accountable. I might agree with, I don't know what the Puerto Rican thing was. I might agree with it. I don't know. But I don't agree with any group that feels as if it's their job to take a bunch of kids and scream in their face and then pat yourselves on the back and act like, we did good. No, you didn't. You pissed me off. You made me mad because you were annoying. You had no cohesive message. You were swearing in front of kids. And you delayed a parade that was there for a marginalized group who's only there about love, peace, welcoming, and pride. You couldn't really screw this up more. But they let you do it, and you easily went along with it. Like I said, I'm not saying that there weren't people in that group that weren't legitimate protesters, but you had no purpose, you had no motive, you had no direction, you had no cause. You just were basically screaming at the top of your lungs. And no one joined you at the end of the day. So, mission accomplished, I guess. Stop swearing in front of kids. What's wrong with you guys? 952-946-6205, 952-946-6205. We'll take a break. Come on back. It's the Matt McNeil Show here on your Monday. AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota. It's the Matt McNeil Show. Hey, how about something for the Smile File? Ex-Trump White House advisor Steve Bannon arrived in federal prison in Connecticut on Monday to begin his 4-month sentence in contempt of Congress charges per multiple outlets. Once again, 4 months, July, August, September, October. He won't be out until right before the election, which is a good thing for us because then we don't have to deal with his Screecher podcast or whatever it is. Bannon is the latest Trump ally to serve prison sentence after the Supreme Court declined his emergency appeal last week. Bannon was convicted of 2 counts of contempt of Congress in July 2022 for refusing to comply with the subpoena. In an interview that aired Sunday on ABC News, Bannon vowed to continue his appeal and characterize himself as a political prisoner. Bannon, who has repeatedly made vague threats of retribution from the January 6th probe, and his conviction told ABC News that if his prison sentence helps delegitimize the January 6th Select Committee, then he would be worth it. He also reiterated previous threats that former President Trump's critics will be investigated if Trump wins a second term. Oh, no, I have zero doubts. And the Supreme Court basically said, yeah, go investigate him. Anyway, guess who swung on by to show his support for Steve Bannon? Royce White. We love this man. He's an American hero. Jeez. By the way, and if I can, let me reiterate something about this. It doesn't matter how much money the Republicans are going to throw into Royce White's opponent. All it takes is Steve Bannon sending out a message from his prison cell that Royce White's still my guy, which he will. He will. That the people that decide the Republican Party, because you welcomed in the crazy town fringe, the people that decide the Republican candidates are going to go with Royce White. Wow. That is a gutsy call. And like I said, DFL, if you do not have his social media posts up on billboards across the state on the day after he wins his primary challenge, if you don't have his if you don't have his social media posts on billboards across the state, absolutely torpedoing every Republican statewide, you're fools. But that is just that's the best part about him, is that the Republicans can't get out of their own way. And once again, they don't want the people that decide who the nominees are for the Republican Party no longer care about competency. They don't care about governing. They don't care about any of this stuff. They just care about getting revenge on their perceived enemies. That's why, by the way, that's why this whole thing is somewhat terrifying. And it's we're getting a preview of where, if Trump wins, things will eventually go, if Trump ever even allows himself to get pulled out of office, arguing the Constitution says I can stay forever. And the Supreme Court has basically said, well, you can't present evidence or intent, so I guess he stays. There's a lot of Republican voters that hear the Republicans say, we're going to get rid of public schools. Public schools, they're going to be gone. And what they're doing in their mind is doing some sort of logistical logic gymnastics, a la what they were doing in town here for the qualifications. That they sit there and they say, well, they're going to get rid of public school for all those people, all the inner city people and those metro people, but they're not going to get rid of public school for me. And of course, they're going to get rid of public school for you. Your public school is going to get wiped out. Rural public schools, metro area public schools. The only public schools that are going to be somewhat safe would be the suburban ones, because the wealthy white suburban districts, the Republicans cannot risk upsetting them. So they'll find some way, some niche way to keep them open, but they'll shut down all the schools across the state. And that Republican is going to sit there and first go, I can't believe this. I knew they were going to shut down some schools, but I didn't think it was going to be my school. And some Republican's going to come on out to them and say, yeah, but isn't this so much better? And even though it's not, their kid doesn't have a public education. Their kid, they have a job that requires them to not be a stay-at-home parent, that they all of a sudden they don't know what they're going to do with their kid outside of either full-time daycare, which will be pricey, or beg and plead to see if you can get one of the vouchers, which has been set aside, the education vouchers, set aside for the wealthiest of wealthy people, because if you've seen anything about vouchers, almost all the vouchers go to the wealthiest people in any given state. It is truly just a grift. The middle and lower class paying for wealthy kids to go to private school. And I kind of want to, you want to look at them and say, you can avoid this eventual downfall by voting Democrat, or at least just not voting for Trump or Royce White or anything like that, but they can't get out of their own way. And it's interesting. If you watch what's going on in England right now in their elections, they're about to vote the entire Tories, all the conservatives, out of office because they have so screwed up that country. It is going to be a monumental loss for them. Well, let's not get to that point here in this country by avoiding going down this road. And I understand you guys are too stupid to understand that you are holding a gun to your own temple and threatening to pull the trigger, but that's exactly what you're doing. And I can't help you if you're that stupid. But just don't act surprised when your bevy of candidates that are highly inferior end up taking everything from you while you sit there with a shocked face. I didn't realize they were going to do that to me. 952-946-6205, 952-946-6205. Let's take a break. Come on back. 2 police stories from this week. And once again, if you're wondering, I did talk about the Supreme Court stuff ad nauseum in the first hour. You can podcast that tonight by all means and listen into what is basically the end of democracy staring us in the face at this point. We'll take a break. Come back. It's the Matt McNeil Show on your Monday. AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, is the Matt McNeil Show. By the way, I am not getting tired of conservatives trying to make the argument, well, Joe Biden's got complete immunity now, too. Isn't that a good thing? No, it's not. Nobody in this country should be immune from being prosecuted, period. Especially not the greatest narcissist this country has ever produced in Donald Trump. I brought up 2 examples. Him backing up a truck to a Treasury Department bank and telling him to fill it up with cash for his own use. And he's going to make an argument, well, I thought the Constitution allowed me to do that. And right now, and once again, if he did that, 95% of the Republicans say, yeah, he can do that. The Constitution says he can do that. They wouldn't get in the way of him. Or even more heinous, he could line up all the firstborn daughters of this country and pick and choose a few of them and go rape them in the Rose Garden and say, guess what? The Constitution tells me I can do that. And 95% of the Republicans right now would say, yep, the Constitution says you can do that. Supreme Court's not going to hold him accountable because, once again, you can't introduce evidence or motive into his actions. Evidence or motive. It's a dictatorship. The Supreme Court has made a dictatorship. And so, no, I don't want Joe Biden to have that level of power. I don't want Donald Trump to have that level of power. And let's just be honest, you don't want Joe Biden to have that level of power either. And if Joe Biden wins, you're going to be the first one screaming, the Supreme Court's got to fix this because we can't have Joe Biden, running around with no consequences. And I said this last hour. The Supreme Court of the United States, in my mind, if Joe Biden wins, will very quickly on their own come out with a clarification saying, of course we didn't mean a president can't be held accountable. But if it's Trump, and once again, it's a 2-tiered system. Republicans have no oversight, have no responsibility, have no accountability. They can do whatever they want to. Democrats, they are constantly held under. It is a Republican dictatorship in this country. The media has failed us. The courts have failed us. Congress has failed us. And the only option, the only savior, is Joe Biden. And you may not like that, but if you're too stupid after those rulings today to say you think you have some sort of other option here, you're a fool. You're an absolute fool. Yeah. I don't think it will be so bad. I mean, if anyone tells me that, I'm just going to presume you're a Republican at this point. You read that Supreme Court ruling. There's no accountability. He literally could murder somebody on the White House grounds. And as long as he says the Constitution says I can do this, Supreme Court says, yeah, you can't hold him accountable because you can't introduce any evidence or motive. A few stories from this weekend that really, okay. First of all, not good. Don't try to jump roundabouts. How about we say that? Motorcyclists had a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day in Chisago County this weekend. On a Saturday afternoon, shenanigans post on Facebook. Chisago County Sheriff's Office said a deputy stopped a motorcycle for speeding with the rider taking his sweet time to pull over, kicking off a comical and thankfully not fatal chain of events. When they asked about the deputy to give his name, the rider answered with a name that later turned out to belong to his brother. According to the sheriff's office, the suspect soon sped off from the deputy, and a chase ensued. A few miles down the road, the motorcyclist found himself inadvertently attempting an Evel Knievel on the Chisago County roundabout jumping competition. The man failed to stick the landing and did not set any records, instead crashing into the roundabout. Wow. The sheriff's office says the suspect then decided to do the 100-yard dash by foot, but deputies caught up to him. I guess he was limping. He was taken to a local hospital for evaluations, expected to be booked into jail when the motorcycle will be held for pending forfeiture. Authorities say the bike did not have a valid registration. The rider, meanwhile, did not have a valid license. It's suspected and is suspected of being under the influence of alcohol. Wow, that's everything in one, isn't it? All right. There were 2 shootings by police this weekend, and we do have to have a conversation about this, because both of them are leading me to have a lot of questions. First of all, up in Crookston, a northern Minnesota police officer shot and killed a man at a homeless shelter late Sunday night, late last night. The Crookston Police Department said the man was being combative towards officers and was not following officers' verbal commands, before an officer fatally shot him with a handgun. Now, the department has not mentioned if the man was being armed. Now, a quick side note. If that man was armed, I guarantee you that would have probably been in the story in the first thing. I'm not saying he wasn't armed, but generally the way the press releases go, if he was armed, it's something that is known from the get-go. This man was armed. Officers didn't really have a choice. They had to do that. The fact that they basically haven't said whether the man was armed leads me to believe he wasn't. So a person at a homeless shelter was being combative towards officers and was not following officers' verbal commands, and you shot him? Officers responded to the Care and Share shelter on East 3rd Street around 11:45 because of a fight. Before an officer shot the man, less lethal means were deployed, the department said, though he did not share what those means were. After the shooting, the man died at the scene. So once again, I'm guessing it was a head or a heart shot, which, how in the hell you're training people to take the first shot aiming for the head or the heart, I don't know. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension is investigating the killing. On Facebook, Care and Share said its donation room and food shelf will be closed on Monday. Following the loss that has taken place, our organization is currently in a state of mourning. Crookston is near the North Dakota border, about 25 miles southeast of Grand Forks. Yeah, there needs to be a little bit more of an explanation here. Because if this was an unarmed man, the gun is not a convenience item. The homeless man should not, I mean, he's, don't give me this demon creature. No, you've got police officers there. You can arrest him. If he's breaking the law, arrest him. It almost feels like what you're telling me in this story is something more of the effect of, well, we just didn't want to deal with him, so we shot him. Oopsie, got him in the heart. So, well, so much for that guy. Yeah, I need more on this. I need more information on this. Same thing goes for the other story, and a lot of people covered this one because it got a lot more visibility because of the closer to the cities here up in North Branch. A woman who was shot to death by police last week in North Branch had struggled with alcohol and mental illness, her husband said on Saturday. Jamie Ann Crabtree, 36, was killed Thursday night during an encounter with officers in a field near the home on the 38,900 block of 3rd Avenue, Nicholas Williams told the Star Tribune. North Branch police said Crabtree was armed with a handgun, intoxicated, and suicidal when officers confronted her. One officer struck Crabtree with a non-lethal pepper ball before a second officer shot her with his firearm, according to police. She died at the scene. Now, let's step back for a quick second. This case, this woman is apparently armed. Somewhat suicidal. Not a good combination. And But one thing that I want to point out here is one officer was trying to hit them with a non-lethal pepper ball before a second officer shot her with his firearm. So one officer was trying to restrain her. The other officer was, for whatever reason, saying, nope, life or death at this point, and wanted to take her out. As of Saturday morning, police had not said why the officers fired at the woman. Police Chief Dan Meyer said police warned body cameras recorded the incident and that the officers had been put on administrative leave. I don't know about the Crookston story. It doesn't say whether there's body cam footage. I would hope there is body cam footage. Would I be surprised if the local law enforcement up there quickly deleted the footage if it sounds as bad as it might have sounded up there? I don't know. In this case, the police chief is saying, nope, we got the body cam footage. Recorded by the incident, the officers have been put on administrative leave. Once again, though, I want to say, when a police officer shoots somebody and there's a feeling of threat, they usually put that in the story, especially if it's a black person. Oh, my God. If it's a black person, they were going to nuke the country. Thank God we shot him and killed him. I mean, seriously, when Ricky Cobb was shot, the narrative from the police was what? Well, you know, he could have killed 1,500 people. Well, thank God he was shot. He wasn't obeying orders. They didn't say 1,500 people, but they were saying that even though the two officers were not dragged by the car that sped off, they still used. Once again, I want to make sure we understand about Ricky Cobb. The two officers were not dragged off and seriously injured by that car, but yet the threat of that they could have been seriously injured by that car was all the justification they need to issue an instantaneous death penalty. You can't make it up sometimes. But you see, is in that case, they talk about, he was driving away. My God, we had to do something. And when your bar of applying a death sentence is so low, the fact that that's not, that she brought the gun up, I had no choice. And once again, I want to say, mental issues and alcoholism and all that stuff aside, if you're trying to confront somebody and they brought the gun up and with intent, looks like intent, yes, you I think at that point you have to fire your weapon. But if you're not saying why you did at this point, that's a little concerning. Was the gun pointed at anyone? It gets a little bit more mystifying here. The State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension was leading the investigation into the shooting, which is a standard practice and is expected to reveal further details in the coming days. Williams said he called 911 when his wife, after drinking heavily, left their home with a bottle of alcohol and a handgun in a case. He had told emergency dispatch operators that suicide by cop was among the comments she made at the time. So I want to make sure we also understand this is becoming a larger problem where people want the cop to shoot them. And I gotta believe police departments, sheriff's office, stuff like State Patrol is going through policies to basically try to negate this, get them to shoot somebody. I mean, I can't believe that the police are like, well, they want to die. It's our job. Bang, down they go. I can't believe police departments are on board with the suicide by cop narrative. The fact that this guy told them that this is where she was at, and yet, I mean, that's a little bit of an eyebrow raiser, to say the least. So he tells the dispatcher this. Now, whether the dispatcher relayed that to the officers is unknown, but that's a little bit of a problem. Williams said he followed his wife as she walked south towards Highway 95. When a police vehicle arrived, he said he told the officer she had a gun. About 3 minutes later, there were a dozen shots. Okay. Crabtree was shot with a 1 square block open field north of the highway. Wait a second here. Now, once again, it doesn't say where those shots are coming from. If Crabtree was the one firing off the shots, police returning fire, understandable. But if that was the case, there's no way on the planet the initial press release wouldn't be brave officers endured a firefight, were able to take out the suspect. That would have been in the report. It wasn't. And if she didn't shoot her gun, how does one officer put 12 rounds into her? And that's the next question is, how many bullet holes does she have in her? Because it's not a video game. I was in the military. You shoot somebody, they're going down. It's not John McClane and Nakatomi Plaza. You're more than likely going to go into shock very quickly. Depending on where you hit that person, if you, I don't know, hit them in the leg, they're down on the ground. They're not going to get up, and they're probably going into shock. You do not have to kill them like it's Space Invaders. 12 rounds? Did the officers shoot 12 rounds into a suicidal woman? Wow. Crabtree was shot in one square block field north of the highway. I started to walk towards her in the field, but officers screamed at me to get back. I said, no, I'm the husband. She needs help. Even so, Williams said he was kept away from his wounded wife. He said officers repeatedly commanded Crabtree to roll away from the gun, even though she was lifeless on the ground. Well, if he got shot 12 times. He said 17 minutes passed before the officers went to aid her. 17 minutes. 17 minutes of a person not moving. 17 minutes? I believe the cops did the wrong thing by waiting so long, said Williams, who took a cell phone video of more than 30 minutes that followed the shooting. He said his wife suffered seizures when she drank and she had been in therapy for mental illness. I knew she was mentally ill. They picked her up 4 or 5 times over the past 3 years, so I was trying to be a patient and help her out. And told them she's trying to commit suicide via cop. And there's at least a legitimate chance in the North Branch case. They said, 10-4, we can help you out with that. 952-94. I need more details in both these cases, please.
If you don't mind me bringing up a point, they keep talking about this open field. Is that suggests to me there was nobody else in danger? Like there weren't other bystanders that this person was putting in danger.
Absolutely. Now, you do bring up a good point. Let's just make sure we say this. If she brought the gun up and was threatening to shoot them, or if those 12 shots, if 3 of those came from her gun, well, that's a very different situation. But once again, if that was the case, why haven't they mentioned that? Because cops are always quick to mention that. If you shot 12 rounds into yourself, into a suicidal woman, and then waited 17 minutes, well, I guess you can say mission accomplished. Dear Lord, I need more answers, people. 952-946-6205. 952-946-6205. We'll take a break, come on back. A little bit of a real wake-up call when I do come on back. It is the Matt McNeil Show.
Yeah, I don't know. Every time you turn around.
AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, the Matt McNeil Show. So, the Supreme Court of the United States just basically said that the president basically is not able to be held accountable for decisions they do in office. That even if it's something that potentially could be done as a non-official, unofficial capacity, you still can't factor in motive or evidence against the president to prosecute him, which, once again, neat trick how you're going to hold him accountable if you can't introduce motive and evidence into the trial. I don't know. It's basically a Donald Trump will never go to jail standard being put forward by the Supreme Court justices. Now, there are some snarky jackasses like guys like Bill Maher and Ralph Nader who basically just sit there, yeah. Shut up. Shut up. At this point, New York Times, everyone else, if you're saying Biden should step aside, you're basically saying you should vote for Trump. And if anyone at this point thinks that man, Trump, deserves to have unfettered power, you saw what he did in office when he thought there were checks and balances on him. Now you have told him and his minions that if he wins the White House again, that he can do whatever he wants. And you probably are sitting there saying that whole argument about taking firstborn daughters and lining them up at the White House and raping them in the Rose Garden, that's out of line, Matt. No, he could argue that was in his presidential powers. The Constitution allowed him to do that. And you know what? You probably would have the Supreme Court say, yeah, I guarantee you 95% of Republicans would say, yep, let him rape her. And that is who these people are. We are on the threshold of this country changing forever. There is only two paths here. Donald Trump and dictatorship, or Joe Biden and democracy somehow survives. Because like I said, I get the feeling that if Joe Biden wins, the Supreme Court will very quickly issue a correction saying, oh, of course presidents can be held accountable. This is a disaster for this country. The worst Supreme Court ruling since the Dred Scott case. And my God, we all have to vote Democrat. That's the only option. Native Roots Radio is up next. We're back tomorrow. Until then, see ya.